similar issues, while Moscow remains silent. In a flurry of trade diplomacy at the G7 summit in Canada, three major nations, the US, UK, and Japan, went head-to-head on critical economic deals. President Donald Trump and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced they had finalized a trade deal. The agreement slashes tariffs on UK aerospace goods and sets a quota for 100,000 cars to enter the US at a lower tariff. While auto and beef deals were struck, the issue of steel and aluminum tariffs remains unresolved. Let's listen in to what the two leaders had to say.
And so we have our trade agreement with the European Union, and it's a fair deal for both. Going to produce a lot of jobs, a lot of income, and we have many other ones coming. But you see the level of enthusiasm is very good. But the relationship that we have is fantastic. So I just want to.
Thank you very much. This now implements on car tariffs and aerospace, a really important agreement, and so this is a very good day for both of our countries, a real sign of strength. So thank you again, Donald. A really important day for both of us.
Great people.
Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said he and Trump have agreed to finalize a new economic and security deal within 30 days. Despite sharp differences over tariffs, Trump called himself a tariff person, while Carney continues to push for a tariff-free agreement. On the other hand, trade talks between the US and Japan fell short. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and Trump failed to reach a deal. Ishiba said key differences remain, particularly on US auto tariffs that could cost Japan billions. Talks will continue at the NATO summit next week in The Hague. Let us listen to what Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba had to say.
これまで日本、アメリカ双方が本当に真摯な議論を精力的に続けました。で、ギリギリまで交渉の可能性を探ってきておるところであります。今なお双方の認識が一致していない、そういう点が残っておりますので、パッケージ全体としての合意には至っておりません。我が国にとって、例えて言えば自動車というのは本当に大きな国益であります。こういうことの国益を守り抜くために、我々として最善の努力を重ねるということにつきます。これは双方相手のあることでございますので、我が国の国益を守る必要があると、これを守り抜かねばならないということでありますから、いつまでにということを申し上げることは困難でございます。
Now we have guests joining us live. He's Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst joining us live from Taiwan. Thank you, Ross, for joining us today. How might unresolved issues like steel and aluminum tariffs impact the long-term stability of the US-UK trade deal, especially under the current political climates in both countries?
The good news is that they've reached a deal on a number of issues, although they haven't reached an agreement on steel and aluminum. But the fact that they're talking, not just at the leadership level, but obviously at the working level as well, I think that gives us reason for optimism that they will reach an agreement on steel and aluminum as well. So although the United States has many different trading partners to reach agreements with, the talks are ongoing. It's clear that the United Kingdom was a priority trading partner, and there's been good progress. So I think we should be optimistic that unresolved issues will also at some point reach agreement.
And now we know that Japan and US did not reach a deal, so Japan left out of a headline deal while the US and UK move forward. Do you foresee any emerging trade blocs or realignment within the G7 that could shift global economic dynamics, and why was Japan not able to reach a deal today?
No, I don't see any blocs emerging within the G7 itself. The other G7 members want to trade with the United States, and they're eager to reach a deal with the United States. So I wouldn't subscribe to any notion that the United States is going to be frozen out of the remaining G6 countries. That's very unlikely. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Ishiba and President Trump, they only met for about 30 minutes. That's simply not enough time to reach an agreement. Just like with the UK, there's ongoing negotiations at the working level, and that's probably where agreements will be reached and then forwarded to the two leaders for their sign-off. But they haven't reached an agreement on the key issue of automobile tariffs, tariffs that the United States imposes on automobiles that are manufactured in Japan and exported to the United States. And understandably, that's an important part of Japan's export mix. And the Prime Minister wants to be very careful to get the best deal possible for Japan, and they weren't able to reach an agreement. But I wouldn't be pessimistic about that. Again, I think the fact that Japan is a priority country among U.S. trading partners for negotiation purposes indicates that it's more likely than not that they'll reach an agreement.
And now staying on this, with Trump's early departure and his and Macron's comments back and forth and many more, now is the G7 as a body becoming less relevant in preventing or resolving global security crisis? Where does this leave European neutrality or mediation efforts? And also Russia saying that it's not useful for Russia to join this G7 anymore.
Yeah, my own view is that most multilateral organizations, whether that's the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, informal groupings like the G7, APEC, which used to be important here in the Asia Pacific region, my view is that these organizations have failed to really reach the hopes that people might have had 10, 15, 25 years ago for these organizations to bring about change on the issues within their purview. In fact, a lot of these multilateral organizations or groupings have really failed, and they've become annual talk fests that don't accomplish much. Now, President Biden did have a big faith in multilateral organizations and groupings, but President Trump does not. So for the next 3.5 years, other world leaders are just going to have to get used to the fact that the United States is not going to be heavily invested in multilateral organizations or groupings. And the best way to reach an agreement with the United States is through bilateral discussions.
And staying on this topic, the G7's joint statement was issued today, and which was firmly pro-Israel and anti-Iran. How do you interpret the language and the timing of that declaration, and what risks are involved in that statement?
Well, most of the G7 countries, generally speaking, they've been allies of Israel over the past decade, so it's not surprising that they would once again reiterate Israel's right to defend itself, especially against an existential threat like Iran having nuclear weapons. But we should also keep in mind that some of these leaders in the G7, they don't get along with Prime Minister Netanyahu very well. Trump does, but even there, between Trump and Netanyahu, there's been some recent friction. But some of the other countries are willing to criticize Israel when they deem it necessary. And we've seen that with the war in Gaza, with France, for example, being very critical of Israel's conduct. So this statement is nice for Israel, I suppose, but I don't think it has much long-term implications, especially if the war continues and these other G7 countries, besides the United States, start to call on Israel to reach a ceasefire.
And from your point of view, has the escalation with Iran strengthened or weakened Netanyahu's domestic political position, particularly given the past protests and criticism of his leadership style?
For now, we see other politicians, opposition politicians, and I think the public will as well. I think they're going to unite around Netanyahu, and that's the right thing to do when one's country is at war. You want to be very careful about criticizing the leadership. You want to support the soldiers who are putting their lives at risk, which Israeli soldiers or airmen are doing every day. So I think we're going to see some unity in the short term, but of course, a lot depends on how long this goes on. As the war in Gaza went on longer and longer, there seemed to be more criticism in Israel, especially among soldiers who were called back for reservist duty, which might not become much of an issue with Iran because it's mostly an air war for Israel. But I think in the short term, we'll see unity on this issue within Israeli society.
Thank you, Ross Feingold, for joining us and sharing your expertise. You will stay with us for our next story.